Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty significant impacting, well, the trucking industry across the U.S.
Yeah, this new executive order about English proficiency for commercial drivers.
Exactly. We're mainly drawing from an article on the XRT Logistics blog, published just yesterday, April 29th, 2025.
Right. And our aim today is really to understand the thinking behind it,
What's driving it, what the potential impacts might be.
and all the different takes on it, because there are quite a few.
Definitely. And it's important to say up front, this isn't like a totally brand new law, is it?
No, not exactly. It's more like they're doubling down on federal rules that were already technically on the books.
Kind of dusting them off and enforcing them more strictly.
If you could put it that way, yes.
So it makes you think, doesn't it? Have you ever really considered how vital clear communication is for something like trucking, for safety efficiency?
It's fundamental,
Yeah.
especially with 18-wheelers on the road.
Okay, so let's dive in and unpack this.
Sounds good. So this order was signed by President Trump April 29th, 2025.
And the timing seems linked to enforcing these existing regulations more rigorously.
That's the core of it, based on the XRT logistics piece.
Hmm.
The administration says the main goals are, well, twofold:
Which are?
boosting road safety, number one, and number two, making sure communication is effective, clear, unambiguous.
Right. They're essentially saying a federal law that existed hasn't been, perhaps, applied as strongly lately.
Exactly. They're putting their foot down now.
And the article mentions a direct quote from President Trump.
Yeah, it does. Something about roadways becoming less safe because of communication issues tied to language barriers.
So the administration's view is pretty clear then.
Very much so. They seem convinced that a solid grasp of English is, well, essential, non-negotiable.
For what specifically? Reading signs.
Reading signs, yeah, understanding traffic rules,
Mhm.
and being able to talk clearly with police or emergency responders.
Especially in critical situations, I imagine.
Precisely. Those high-stakes moments where misunderstanding just isn't an option. It's a compelling argument from their perspective.
Okay, so if that's the why, let's talk about the how. Implementation. Who's handling this?
That falls squarely on the Department of Transportation, the DOT.
Right. And how are they going to, check this?
The main tool, according to the XRT article, will be standardized English literacy tests.
Literacy tests for all commercial drivers.
Yep, that's the plan. They have to pass them.
And what will these tests actually cover? Is it just reading?
It's reading, yes, understanding road signs,
Uh-huh.
but also comprehension, like filling out necessary paperwork correctly,
Okay.
and crucially, verbal communication, speaking English without needing an interpreter.
So it's quite comprehensive. Reading, writing, speaking.
It seems so.
Yeah.
It elevates English proficiency to a core part of being considered fit to drive commercially, alongside the usual operational checks.
And if a driver doesn't meet these standards, what happens then?
The consequences sound pretty serious. The article mentions potential suspension of their commercial driving privileges.
Suspension. Wow. Anything else?
Yeah, they can be placed out of service immediately.
Out of service. That stops them working right there and then.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
Which, as you said, could have huge knock-on effects for the driver, their family, the company, the whole supply chain, potentially.
Which naturally leads to the question, how is the industry reacting? The trucking companies, the associations.
Well, that's where it gets interesting and quite varied. The XRT piece highlights this diversity.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, you've got the Greater Houston Trucking Association. They've come out supporting the focus on safety and professionalism.
Which aligns with the administration's goal.
It does. But, and this is a big but for them, they're really stressing the need for supportive education,
Meaning?
meaning resources to help drivers, particularly those from diverse language backgrounds, meet the standard without being unfairly disadvantaged. You want safety and inclusivity.
That makes sense. Balancing act. What about other groups?
The Texas Trucking Association, on the other hand, seems to welcome it more directly.
How so?
They see it as a good step for safety and, maybe importantly for them, for uniform enforcement across the board.
Uniform enforcement.
Yeah, they even brought up past problems, like issues with fraudulent licenses, suggesting this helps standardize things.
Interesting contrast there between the Houston and Texas groups.
It is. It might reflect different memberships or priorities, but beneath the surface, even with differing levels of support,
There's a common worry.
yes, a widespread concern about the workforce impact. Because, let's face it, non-native English speakers are a really significant part of the U.S. trucking workforce.
A very significant part. So any policy potentially restricting them.
Raises big questions about labor supply, logistics, everything.
Which brings us neatly into the legal and maybe ethical side of things.
Right. The potential for discrimination is a major discussion point mentioned in the article.
How do you set a national standard for safety without infringing on individual rights, especially in such a diverse country?
That's the tightrope. Advocacy groups are definitely weighing in, arguing this could disproportionately hit immigrant communities.
Creating barriers to employment for drivers who are otherwise skilled and experienced?
That's the concern. And legal experts are looking closely at how this aligns with civil rights laws, equal opportunity regulations.
Yeah,
It's complex.
it really is. And you mentioned this isn't happening in isolation. The XRT article connects it to a broader administration focus.
It does. It seems to fit into a larger initiative by the Trump administration regarding English.
Go on.
Well, just back in March 2025, there was another executive order designating English as the nation's official language.
Ah, right. I remember that.
And that same order also rolled back a requirement for federal agencies to provide language assistance services.
Interesting. So there's a pattern.
The administration's stated rationale for those moves was promoting unity in government efficiency. This trucking mandate seems like a specific application of that broader philosophy.
Prioritizing English in official functions.
Essentially, yes. So this trucking rule isn't just standalone, it reflects that wider policy direction.
Okay, so if this stricter enforcement really takes hold, what are the practical ripple effects? For drivers, for training schools?
Well, the immediate thing is driver training programs will likely need to adapt. Quite significantly, perhaps.
How so? More English classes.
Yeah, incorporating a more focused English language instruction right into the curriculum seems inevitable. It becomes a core skill they need to teach and verify.
And trucking companies.
They might have to step up too. Maybe invest in language resources for their current drivers or for new recruits to help them pass these tests.
Could we see maybe a temporary shortage of drivers while people get up to speed?
That's certainly a possibility. A potential temporary dip in the available workforce as drivers take time to improve their English and prepare for testing.
Now, going back to the administration's main justification, public safety. How strong is that argument according to its proponents?
For those supporting the order, it's a very direct link. Clear communication equals safer roads.
Explain that a bit more.
The argument is that drivers fluent in English can better understand signs, react appropriately in emergencies, follow instructions from law enforcement.
Reducing misunderstandings that could lead to accidents.
Exactly. They frame it as a proactive measure to cut down on preventable incidents on highways.
Makes sense from a purely safety standpoint, but like any big policy change, there are critics. What are their main worries, as highlighted in the source?
The biggest concerns circle back to marginalization, the potential to push non-English speaking communities to the fringes.
And limit their job opportunities in trucking.
Precisely. Critics argue it might not fully respect the linguistic diversity we have in the U.S. and could actually worsen existing inequalities.
Are there practical concerns, too, about actually doing this?
Yes, definitely. Apprehension about the whole implementation process. Are there enough resources? How will it be managed fairly? How do you support the drivers affected? Those kinds of questions.
Okay. The XRT logistics piece had that helpful FAQ section, too. Let's maybe run through some key takeaways from that to cement things.
Good idea. One point they really hammered home is that this enforces existing requirements.
Right, not inventing new ones out of thin air.
Exactly. It's about stricter application. And the why comes back repeatedly to safety.
Reading signs, communicating clearly.
Maintaining standards on the road, all that.
And for drivers currently on the road.
They'll need to demonstrate proficiency. That's the bottom line. If they can't, restrictions are possible.
And while there are calls for educational help.
The specifics of that support are still up in the air. That's pending further details.
And the DOT sets the timeline for when this all kicks in.
Correct. They'll determine the implementation schedule.
And this applies to all commercial drivers. No exceptions mentioned.
None mentioned. It seems to be across the board for commercial motor vehicle operators.
And failure to comply means
Being placed out of service immediately.
can't work. And the tests themselves, reading, writing, speaking, but no interpreters allowed.
That's right. Proficiency has to be demonstrated directly in English.
So again, not a new law, but much stricter enforcement.
Precisely. With the overall stated goal being safer roads and better communication in the industry.
Okay. So As we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear this executive order is a major move.
Definitely. Driven by safety goals, aiming to standardize communication.
But it's definitely stirred things up. We've seen diverse reactions, lots of questions about fairness, inclusivity.
The practicalities, the potential impact on a workforce that relies heavily on immigrants and non-native English speakers.
It really boils down to that core tension, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The vital goal of highway safety versus the equally important concern for fairness and opportunity in a diverse workforce.
A workforce that's indispensable to our economy.
Couldn't agree more.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder. As this policy unfolds, how can everyone involved, the industry, the regulators, the drivers, find that balance?
That balance between the undeniable need for safety and the reality of the diverse linguistic fabric of the trucking workforce.
It's a tough question. How do you ensure safety while respecting and supporting the people who keep America moving?
Yeah, it's a complex puzzle, and the way it gets solved will definitely have ripple effects across logistics and transportation for some time to come.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Lots to think about there.